Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Tom Cronin is an ex-bond trader turned global meditation expert. He is a coach, a meditation teacher, speaker, and the author and producer of The Portal. The Portal is a wide-ranging exploration of 6 personal stories about overcoming adversity and trauma using meditation and mindfulness to find transcendental peace. Our conversation ranges from artificial intelligence to meditation, and from the wisdom of ancient cultures to humanity's present. I am so pleased to welcome Tom Cronin to Bump in the Road. Tom, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, fill people in on your background a bit.
Well, I'm currently, right now, I'm a meditation teacher, speaker, corporate facilitator, and run retreats. And I was the film producer of the Portal film and the writer of the Portal book. But my life took quite a turn many years ago where I was working in finance as a broker on a very hectic trading room floor. If anyone's seen Wolf of Wall Street, you'll get a very clear idea about what my life was like. It was very, very similar to that. I started my career out as a broker in 1987, and it was kind of fast and furious and crazy times. And it was all very good and exciting. I was only, young, in my late teens and early 20s, and I got swept along by the culture of a late 80s, early 90s finance industry, which was very fast with lots of drinking, lots of drugs, and no HR departments. It was very unchecked. So, of course, there was lots of glamour and glitz that pulled me down those laneways. But what happened was, over time, I started to get a lot of symptoms showing up on my body where I got sort of a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. And eventually that morphed into a sort of really deep, dark depression. I had a lot of addictions and a lot of self-loathing and feeling very lost with where I was going with life. It definitely wasn't the path that I ever imagined myself to be on. I wanted to be a journalist writing articles for Time magazine about capitalistic greed. And here I was as a, drug-taking broker in the finance industry earning nearly $1 million a year. So I'd come a long way from my sort of orbit without realizing it. And that led to some very extreme sort of anomalies in my body, the anxiety and the panic attacks, depression. And then eventually I just had a full-blown nervous breakdown at the age of 29. And I was put on suicide watch. I was seeing psychiatrists and doctors and psychologists and put on pharmaceutical drugs. And it was a really dark time in my life. I was very lost and didn't really have a sense of identity, didn't know who I was. And then that's when I found meditation. And it was a really fascinating process to go through to discover this thing that was completely alien in my life. And it just was like this incredible shift, this sort of illumination that just started to happen. And I realized that this was the thing that I'd been looking for all my life. Not so much the meditation, but what I found through the meditation. That was that connection to something much purer, much deeper within. And so that was the starting point for my journey to get to here.
Meditation's so interesting. Some people still think it's a little bit woo. And there are so many different types of meditation. I think there's something for everybody. How did you pursue your meditation practice?
I did do a lot of research. This is the thing. There are many different techniques, and it's about not only just finding the technique that you feel that you resonate with and the one that you kind of feel you can implement and integrate into your day on a daily basis. If it's like a 3-hour meditation that you have to sit in lotus and only in lotus and you can't sit in lotus, then it's probably going to be a difficult meditation for you to integrate. So finding ones that are going to suit you and your lifestyle, you and your practice. Now, if you want to go off into a monastery and live for, a life of reclusiveness, then those longer sort of meditations might be much more suitable. I found one that I could really integrate because I was still a broker. I had, financial commitments. So I actually started meditating and continued on for that job for 16 more years of all things. So it wasn't the industry that was the problem. It was my relationship and my thought track while I was in that industry. And so for me, when I look for meditation, I look for something that would be quite impacting quite quickly, something that I knew that there were tangible results, and something that was not going to take up huge amounts of time, but was very effective. So that's when I found, for me at the time, it was a transcendental meditation or transcending meditation technique that put me into quite a deep state quite quickly. For other people, I would just suggest just do your research and find a technique that works for you. And then within that technique, find a teacher that you resonate with. Ideally, I find that finding a qualified teacher and putting yourself through a course, that proper training, is going to be the most effective way to learn.
Wow, I didn't realize you stayed in finance for 16 more years. What was it like to manage this loss of identity and reintegrate back into your same job?
Look, initially, in all transparency, it was very difficult initially because, I went from very quickly being like one of the wildest party guys that, was leading the pack as far as going out there and doing crazy things, to not wanting to do that at all. Once I started learning to meditate, all those addictions and those cravings just melted away. And I had to find a way to integrate. That whole industry was built on, drugs and drinking and partying at that time. It's changed a lot now, thank goodness, from what I hear. But I had to find ways to integrate this new way of living in that industry. And initially it was very alienating and quite challenging. But what I learned over time was that to really live my truth and do what was true for me. And what I found was, because a lot of what I had to do for my job was to entertain clients. These were the bankers, the traders that were dealing lots of money and doing them through our company, through me. To develop those relationships, we had to entertain them, and usually it involved late nights, drinking in nightclubs and parties. But what I found was a new way of doing that, and that was to take them and their wives and my wife out for dinner, or to the opera, or to yoga retreats. We'd go on surfing safaris. And what started to happen was I found a way to elevate their life, not deteriorate or detract from their life. And it was great for my business. It really helped, because it was a way to add value to my clients' lives by giving them something that was going to elevate them in some way.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it was very unique for the industry, I must admit. But I just had to find a way that was going to make it work.
What made you ultimately decide to leave trading?
It's just this deep arising that came from within about having more to do in life than what I was doing. It just got harder and harder to turn up each day and just quote, a quarter point movement on a 10-year bond, and try and make some money out of that. It just felt that there was not that there's anything wrong with that job. It's, we all need to provide for our families, and that was a really great medium for me to do that. People go off to do all sorts of jobs just purely because they've got to feed their family and pay for their mortgage or their rent. So there's nothing wrong with working in a position where we don't have a passion for it. Because I think I just wanted to segue a little bit. We've become very obsessed with this idea that our job should be really, really fulfilling. And this is only a very new phenomenon. Traditionally, for thousands of years, most jobs were basically just to feed your family and to put a roof over your house. And this is a very new idea that if we're not working in a career that is our life purpose, then there must be something wrong with us, and we need to drop that. Even Superman had a day job. He only wore Lycra part-time. So I was wearing Lycra part-time, but I decided to wear it full-time now. But for me, I had to find a way to do this in a bigger way and a more sustainable way that would enable me to do both. That is, to do something that I love and do something that I feel is a great passion and something with a lot of purpose, but something that could also sustain my, personal and family needs. So that was trying to build a career. And it took quite a while to do that, to have the confidence and the courage. Admittedly, I had a 26-year career in finance. The first 10 years was being Wolf of Wall Street. The second 16 was, doing it with some more mindfulness and more consciousness. But it took a while to map out a particular model that would now enable me to financially survive. And even then, that, like all entrepreneurs will know, it doesn't plan out how you expect it to. And so that took even then a lot longer for it to become a financially sustainable model.
Where did the idea of the portal, both the book and the movie, come from?
Well, I'd seen The Secret, and The Secret blew me away in a couple of respects. Firstly, I really like the subject matter. It was the first time I'd come across that. It was very early days of this whole personal development, law of attraction thing, even though, Napoleon Hill's book had been around for many, many decades. But what they did was they managed to take a film and a book and take very esoteric subject matter. That is what you think you can attract. It was quite phenomenal. What you feel you can attract. And they managed to insert that into the households of the world. They mainstreamed this very esoteric idea. And so that really excited me about the possibility of mainstreaming meditation through a film and a book. Because at this time, this was pre-apps. There was no Headspace and Calm, and meditation was very much still unheard of. And I just discovered it, and I was very excited after seeing The Secret that I could potentially do something like that to mainstream meditation. And so one thing that left me a little bit disappointed, I guess, with The Secret was that they showed you the what, which is, hey, you can attract things if you think and feel about them. But they didn't show you the how that much to some degree. There was no sort of training after the course. And that's what really inspired me, was that if I could make a film and book and provide the training, we show a film and a book that inspires you to meditate through 6 personal stories that have all had a major transformation when they started to meditate, that maybe people might want to learn meditation. Then if we provided the tool for them to learn to meditate, then that would be sort of the whole complete package. And that's what we decided to create with the portal, was a film, a book, and then a meditation program.
Tell people a little bit about the project, because it is an astonishingly beautiful and very aggressive project, actually.
Yeah, look, it's been blood, sweat, and tears, and I'm still recovering from it. It's been a long 9-year journey. It was much, much more difficult than I thought, and still has its challenges. Trying to get a film out to the world and get people to watch it is a lot more challenging than I thought. I just had this idea that it would just go viral and everyone would watch it and it would just become a global phenomenon. Like, why wouldn't you, right? I'm just realizing that things are a little bit harder than that. So we wanted to do something that was different. We'd seen a lot of documentaries that was sort of quite mainstream, just a lot of information. And we wanted it to be something that was an emotional arc that tracked the arc of a natural film emotional arc. And that's, following the hero's journey. So we look at crisis, we look at the setup, the childhood setup. We look at the crisis that the story would go through. We look at the redemption, and then we look at the final, when you find the secret chalice and you come back to conquer the world with the magic elixir. And so we kind of mapped that out with some great screenwriters and tried to build out an arc. It was quite challenging because we've got the 6 stories, but we also have 3 futurists that look at humanity on the macro levels. We have micro and macro. And the macro we had to weave in and out, which is trying to find 6 stories that cover global crisis themes, because we talk a lot about crisis in the film. And what inspired me around that was that I had this perspective. It was about when we started the film, about sort of 8 years ago, that humanity was on a trajectory that, under Vedic principles, was undeniably on a trajectory towards a major crisis. See, when we sustain a particular status quo and we maintain that and maintain that and maintain that without any evolution, without any progress, without any change, then over time, only one thing can happen. So we have maintenance, which is Vishnu, the god of maintenance, and then we've got Shiva, the lord of destruction, which comes in and starts to remove the obstacles to that maintenance, because everything must evolve and grow and progress and evolve. So what I could see was that humanity had been holding on to a particular model for many millenniums. That is, if I get more, I'm happier. If I have more experiences, I'm happy. If I have outcome-oriented fulfillment, I'm happy. If I'm ignorant of my internal state, of my unboundedness, of my spirituality, if I'm distracted from that because of the external world pleasures, then we naturally, by default, start to get crisis, which is part of evolution. It's part of the process for us to start to discover what's true. And we're living in quite an age of ignorance. And ignorance leads to suffering, and we have immense suffering on a planet, and it doesn't need to be that way. And I could see this macro perspective of humanity on this sort of trajectory moving towards a cliff, and that a crisis is imminent because It's the only way, unfortunately, that we may start to look inward rather than outward for our source of fulfillment. And we know of people for many thousands of years have found an inner fulfillment in the state of enlightenment. It's just that for the majority of us, myself included, we'd been ignoring that possibility, and that leads to immense suffering and conflict and sickness and disease. And that's what we're seeing. And what's called a rashi in Sanskrit is a cataclysmic event as a force of evolution to enact change when change becomes, a necessary situation. And so that's why we have the crisis in our personal stories. They all had crisis, and all of them found that crisis was a major turning point in their life for evolution. And with crisis, only one of two things can happen. We either break down or break through. So Kodak had a crisis, they broke down. A relationship might have a crisis and they might divorce. A civilization might have a crisis and they might self-destruct, like the Mayans and the Aztecs and Easter Island. And so we want to make sure as a species that we don't take that latter option, we break through as an option. We want to break through to a new way of living, and that requires opening up our minds, connecting to our hearts, and discovering what's deep within us.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in the book or the movie, I forget which, you said we're in a destabilizing system, moving up or down. One of them is imminent. And, I look at just the way finance is structured, at least here in the U.S., and I think globally, it's structured on the idea of unlimited growth. Well, we're looking at unlimited growth with finite resources. Technology may change that finite resources piece of the equation somewhat, but it's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, and this will be one of the potential crises that we're looking at. We've got a number of potential crises. It could be nuclear, it could be AI, it could be a financial collapse, which is probably could be a multitude of those all at once or within close proximity. But the idea of the system requiring ongoing mass consumption for the economic model to thrive is leading us to where we are right now, which is let's just print more money so that we can keep an economy that grows based upon the consumption and commoditization of things. So if we look at what that means, it means that the ocean isn't commoditizable, but the whales in the ocean are commoditizable. We look at trees aren't commoditizable, but they're essential for our sustainability, but we don't commoditize them. We commoditize the 4x2 we pull out of a tree. It's like bees. We don't commoditize bees. So we don't really put a value on bees. But what we do put a value on is the honey. And so what we don't realize is that all of those things, the ocean, the bees, and the trees, are actually essential for our own sustainability. But this idea of commoditization for an economic model is something that is fraught with danger, and will see a self-termination of a species if we're not careful. What's exciting about that is that we're such a conscious and intelligent species to some degree. We have that capacity. We don't utilize it to some degree as well. But we do have that capacity to be incredibly intelligent, adaptive, and conscious. And so I've got some very close friends that are doing phenomenal things, building new economic models that have new value systems. Their values in those economic models aren't on commoditization. The values are based on contribution. And so it's a fascinating model that the wealthy people will be the ones that contribute the most to the uplift, not just of humans, but of the planet itself. And what we'll see is a reweighting of the human position on the planet. At the moment, the human position is very superior. So we extract whatever we can at the consequences of the whole. That's the planet and the animals. And we see the planet and the animals as of service to us in our own growth and survival. But what we will see out of necessity, hopefully not out of necessity, but most likely out of necessity, but hopefully out of choice and conscious choice, will be a repositioning of humans in a much more equal position with the rest of the planet, and start to revalue where we lie in that space.
How does that play into contribution? As you talk, one of the things I think about is really a reweighting of values, in that rather than looking at the commodity, the 2x4 that comes out of the forest, changing that to value the entire forest and having it be an integral part of how we look at the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it will be things like, and these economic models are very complex. It's very hard to build something that we don't know, how it's going to play out, and it can only be built into a system where the state of mind of people are able to embrace that, because unfortunately we have so many egos operating on the planet, and the ego can only be motivated by its own personal pursuits. And so if an ego, which is basically all companies are run by egos, that's an individual with a personality and an identity. And so that company, which is run by a group of people sitting around a board or one person, are motivated by their own individual, pursuits. And so we can't build and integrate these new economic models that have new value systems until we get the consciousness of those people to start to be a lot more experiential of the whole, where they start to experience themselves less of the individual because of their meditative practices or ayahuasca practices or whatever else they're using. And that's why we're seeing a proliferation of these particular tools to break down the construct of the ego. So we start to operate from a state of mind that is, and by default, can't do anything else but consider the integration of the whole, because it experiences itself as the whole. So therefore, its business operations will be designed by how does this integrate and support everything that it touches? How do we not extract something at the cost of something else in a win-lose paradigm, which is what a lot of businesses are based on, a win-lose paradigm, that this business thrives because something else comes at a consequence. So it's very difficult to build these economic models. But what it looks like is that, you might have a forest in your backyard, and that forest is actually, we know for sure that that forest is contributing to the uplift of humanity because it's providing us with oxygen. How do we value that? How do we value oceans? How do we value someone's service to humanity? And these are phenomenal economic models that they're building, where someone who Amandine, who works in the film, she was just working in the Central African Republic, which is a very challenging place to work. Now, she could actually be one of the wealthiest people on the planet on these new economic models because of her contribution that she does to the world, and it's based on the way we pay for certain things, and it's complex. I'm still trying to get my head around some of these models that they're building, but it's quite fascinating at the same time and exciting.
And how would wealth manifest itself in this system?
Well, we've got to look at what wealth is, and this is the problem. We have a very one-dimensional view of wealth. We look at wealth as a fiat currency, which is really not really wealth, because at the moment, governments are just printing it like there's no tomorrow. So it doesn't really, and that's why it's losing its value time and time again, day after day. So at the moment, we have a very one-dimensional view of wealth, is that how many dollars do I have in my wallet? How many dollars do I have in my bank account? But what we're not putting on a value of wealth, which is phenomenal if you look at what's going on right now, we don't look at wealth as health. And so one of the greatest wealth, one of the greatest sort of values of wealth that we can have is how healthy we are, but we don't value that very well. If we look at the conditioning and the coding of most of society, you go into a supermarket and you'll see that 90% of the food in that supermarket isn't contributing to the wealth of someone. It's actually contributing to the profits of a company at the cost of someone's health. So we're not valuing wealth as health. We don't value wealth as family connections. And so we see a deterioration in family connections, yet it's such a valuable thing. We don't value wealth as being able to walk barefoot on the ground in the earth around a forest. These are the things that we have to revalue what wealth is, and what will happen when we start to revalue wealth. And I'm seeing this very rapidly happening in my community of more awakened beings that have been doing their meditation practices for a while. They live so much more simply, and it goes back to a lot of things that we learn from very ancient tribal cultures that lived very sustainably for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, that they had a different set of values on what wealth is. You can really just learn so much from the traditional landowners here in Australia of what their sense of wealth was, and still is to some respects. And it was, being on the land. It was connecting with the land and living simply and eating just what they need, consuming just what they need. Whereas I just moved house, and it made me kind of quite repulsed when I realized that I had like 300 boxes of stuff. And my wife and I looked at it piled high as it went into the truck. I'm like, how did we work so hard to buy all of this stuff just to put it in the back of a truck and move it to another location? And it's something that we never used to do as a species. It's a very new phenomenon. It's only 50, 100, 200 years old, probably only 50 to 100 years old. This idea of mass consumption and accumulation of assets in this idea of what wealth is.
What role does AI have to play in this sort of evolution of human behavior and thought?
That's a big rabbit hole. I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't think any of us knows. I think we're on the precipice of something that's exciting or incredibly treacherous. Um, from what I hear from the people that I talk to, AI is the greatest risk we have to the survival of humanity. And it comes back to the paperclip maximizer idea. Have you heard of the paperclip maximizer idea?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay. So the idea of the paperclip maximizer idea is that if you give AI a job to build paperclips, then the only thing that AI knows is to build paperclips. And so you give it some materials and it will start building its paperclips. Now, it will do that 24/7, night and day. It doesn't have sick leave. It doesn't complain. It doesn't, need holidays. It's just very, very efficient. So one would say that it's much better to have an AI intelligence doing that job than a human, because humans, they get sick, they get colds, they have to get vaccines, they want holidays and they want to take Christmas off. Whereas AI doesn't have that discrimination. It's so efficient. So you think, well, why don't we just put AI in there? But then what happens is you give it the materials and it starts building the paper clips. But if it runs out of the materials, then it starts going, well, we need more materials. So then it starts using up your cars and your bridges and your pots and your pans because it knows it only got one thing and it doesn't think about mindfully the consequences of its action. It just does the job because that's what it's programmed to do. So it starts using the cars and the bridges and the pots and the pans and starts building more paper clips. And then it runs out of pots and pans and bridges and cars. So then it goes, well, what else can I use? I know what, I'll use the humans to build the paper clips. So it starts using humans to build paper clips. And then, of course, we see the termination of the species. So it's a kind of, it's a metaphor used in AI risk circles when we're talking about the possible implications of AI. Just not so much, there's the other sides of AI being a problem in that people can use it for weapons of war, which we know are happening already, that some of the weapons of war with AI are quite concerning, and the problem with war and conflict and the idea of wealth being something that we can acquire is that we will always need to have the upper hand when it comes to conflict, which means we'll always need to build better weapons, and that just is also a self-terminating prophecy. So, but as far as AI, it can also be a phenomenal thing in that it teaches us how to be unconditionally loving, and this is what the Loving AI project is that we talk about in the film. When we code AI from our state of mind of an unconditionally loving perspective, if we're conscious enough to be able to have that capacity to program AI to be that way, then it can't be anything else but that. It doesn't have the capacity to be anything else but unconditionally loving, because that's what AI is. It's as good as what we code it to be. And so we have to be really careful about the state of consciousness of the coders that are coding the AI.
Yeah, you say the biggest bottleneck is the state of mind of the creators, because we create what we are. And Einstein said something similar, essentially that you can't solve a problem with the same energy that created it.
Yeah, this is the dilemma with a static mindset of humans. That's not, we're getting intelligent because we learn. We're always learning. We're listening to podcasts. We're doing uni degrees. We're studying. We're constantly learning. So we are increasing our intelligence. But quite often what we're not doing is increasing our capacity to access wisdom. When you increase intelligence without increasing your capacity to access wisdom, which is innate, and that's because we don't do that internal meditative process, then we increase intelligence without increasing wisdom, and that's dangerous. What we need to do is increase intelligence, which we're doing, but increase wisdom and integrate wisdom and intelligence at the same time. Then things can really be quite phenomenal for the species. And look, I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom in this podcast, but I think as a species, we're getting there so quickly. We're seeing this rapid proliferation of, plant-based medicines and, and meditation techniques and qigong and breath work. All these ancient modalities are starting to be mainstreamed, and there's a very good reason for that, because it's essential that they get mainstreamed. It's not the time for these practices to be contained to these remote places anymore. There's actually a reason why they must be mainstreamed, and mainstreamed quite quickly and available to the whole.
Well, they work, and I think that it takes a very small percentage of the overall population to start to create real change. And I would hope, in terms of meditation, going inward, seeking that wisdom that we need, I would hope we're getting close to that. We're
getting close to both. We're getting close to self-termination. We're getting close to an enlightened planet. and it's going to come down. It's like 22-all with 3 minutes to go at the footy game, and no one's going to leave the bleachers. It's kind of like, let's just hang in there. This is a nail biter. We're going to see what happens here. So we're getting close to both.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. You can subscribe to our free podcast at www.bumpintheroad.us or become a premium member to hear the full conversation. Just go to www.bumpintheroad.us for more information and to sign up.